Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're going back to the early 1500s, to the Caribbean.
The age of exploration, a fascinating and often tumultuous period.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Nicolás de Ovando. You might not know his name, but he had a huge impact on the Caribbean.
Pivotal figure, really. Shaped a lot of what we see in the region today.
So, was he a hero, villain, something in between?
That's what we're here to figure out.
Right. By taking a close look at his life, his actions, we can get a better understanding of this crucial period.
A period of immense change, the Caribbean in the early 1500s. A melting pot of cultures, ambitions. You've got Spanish conquistadors, indigenous populations. The legacy of Columbus's voyages still very much present.
It's 1502. Let's imagine we're there, stepping off a ship in Santo Domingo, the main settlement on Hispaniola.
Which is, of course, the island that's now split between the Dominican Republic and Haiti.
Right, so picture this. You step onto the shore, the air is thick, humid.
Yeah.
You hear the sounds of construction all around you.
A sense of both opportunity and uncertainty in the air.
Definitely. And amidst all of this enters Nicolás de Ovando, ready to make his mark on history.
A man on a mission, tasked with bringing order to this, let's be honest, somewhat chaotic situation.
Yeah, I mean, Spain had just tasted the potential riches of the New World, thanks to, or perhaps because of, Columbus.
Right, and they were eager to solidify their power, to establish a firm foothold, and of course to extract as much wealth as possible.
But things weren't exactly running smoothly, were they? I mean, before Ovando, there was Francisco de Bobadilla. He was the governor, but...
He didn't quite live up to expectations, shall we say.
Yeah, I was going to say, he kind of made things worse.
Well, let's just say the crown was not pleased with his management style.
So they needed someone new, someone with a different approach. And that's where Ovando comes in.
A man known for his efficiency, his discipline, and let's just say a certain firmness.
So who was this guy? What kind of background did he have that made him the right, or at least the chosen man for the job?
Well, he hailed from Broses, a small town in western Spain, known for its agricultural roots.
Interesting. Especially considering what he later introduces to Hispaniola. We'll get to that.
We will. But Broses was also known for its strong military tradition.
Ah, so a blend of practicality and, well, let's call it assertiveness.
Precisely. And that blend shaped his worldview and would ultimately define his approach to governing Hispaniola.
It doesn't sound like they were sending him on a diplomatic mission.
Not exactly. No, he was sent with clear objectives. First, establish a stable administration. Think bureaucracy, law enforcement, the whole shebang.
Make things run smoothly.
That's the idea. Second, assert the authority of the Spanish crown. No more of that Bobadilla-style freelancing.
And third, I'm guessing, make some money.
You guessed it. Maximize economic exploitation. Gold was the top priority, but also agriculture. They wanted to turn Hispaniola into a profit-generating machine.
So Ovando arrives in style, right? I'm picturing a grand entrance.
Oh, absolutely. A grand expedition, 30 ships setting sail from Sanlúcar de Barrameda in February 1502.
That's a lot of ships.
It was a massive undertaking. Around 2,500 men on board. Soldiers, settlers, religious figures, artisans.
Wow. And I imagine they didn't travel light.
Oh, no. They brought horses, livestock, seeds. It was more than a voyage. It was a migration. A statement.
Spain was serious about this whole colonization thing.
They were in it for the long haul.
Okay, so they arrive in Santo Domingo on April 15, 1502. What's the scene? What does Ovando find when he gets there?
Well, it wasn't the grand city it would later become. Remember, this is just a few years after Columbus.
So it was still early days.
Very much so. The settlement was rudimentary, hastily built, not a lot of order.
That sounds like a challenge for a guy like Ovando.
A challenge he embraced. He immediately sets about transforming Santo Domingo into the first planned European city in the Americas.
So he was not just a governor, but also an urban planner.
You could say that. He envisioned a city with grid-like streets, impressive buildings, a display of power, European sophistication.
A message to both the indigenous population and the rest of the world.
Exactly. Spain was here to stay, and they were going to do things their way.
But of course, there's another side to this story. The indigenous population. The Taíno people. How did Ovando approach, well, what became a very tragic chapter in their history?
That's where things get complicated, and where the debate about Ovando's legacy really begins. Remember that goal of maximizing profits?
Yeah.
Well, to achieve it, Ovando implemented a system that would have devastating consequences for the Taíno people. It was called the encomienda system.
The encomienda system, a system that from what I remember, was not exactly known for its fairness.
You're right. In essence, it granted Spanish colonists the right to use indigenous labor in exchange for, supposedly, protection and conversion to Christianity.
Protection, huh? Sounds a bit like a wolf guarding the sheep.
An apt analogy. In reality, the encomienda system was brutal. Forced labor, exploitation, abuse.
So while Ovando is building a gleaming new city, there's a much darker reality unfolding in the countryside.
Precisely. It's this duality, this juxtaposition, that makes Ovando such a complex and controversial figure. It's important to remember Ovando wasn't some rogue agent. He was following orders. His actions were very much in line with the Spanish crown's grand vision for their empire.
Right. So they were playing the long game here. What were their long-term goals? Beyond, just grabbing all the gold they could get their hands on.
Oh, it was definitely about more than just short-term profits. They wanted to establish a model for colonial administration, a system they could replicate throughout the Americas. Novando's success in creating a stable bureaucracy, in enforcing laws, all of that, however brutally it was achieved, became a blueprint.
A blueprint for oppression.
Sadly, yes, but also a blueprint for how to effectively govern. From their perspective, at least, his efforts in Hispaniola laid the groundwork for the expansion of their power and influence.
So he was, in a way, setting the stage for what would become this vast Spanish empire.
Precisely. And of course, we can't forget about the economic impact. The gold extracted from Hispaniola, much of it through that very exploitative encomienda system, filled Spanish coffers. It helped finance further exploration and conquest.
A self-perpetuating cycle of exploitation.
Exactly. More gold meant more resources to conquer more land, which led to even more gold. It's a chilling thought.
It is, and it really highlights that dark side of history, doesn't it? The way economic ambition can lead to immense human suffering.
Absolutely. But we also can't forget the religious aspect of Spanish colonialism.
Right. I mean, they weren't just interested in gold and territory. They were also on a mission to convert the indigenous population to Christianity.
It was seen as both a religious duty and, let's be honest, a way to solidify control. They believed that by converting the Taíno people, they could more effectively govern them.
So it's about imposing their beliefs, their culture on another.
And that cultural imposition, that attempt to erase existing beliefs, had a profound impact, a lasting impact.
Okay, so we've talked about Ovando the administrator, Ovando the, enforcer of empire. But what about Ovando the man? What kind of personality did he have? What drove him?
Well, sources described him as highly organized, disciplined, driven, meticulous attention to detail, tireless work ethic, absolutely committed to following orders. He was, in many ways, the ideal administrator. From the Spanish crown's perspective.
Sounds like a by-the-book kind of guy.
He was, but it's not quite that simple. Alongside that efficiency, there was also a ruthlessness, a certain ambition that could definitely border on the tyrannical.
A man of contradictions.
He was. He was willing to use any means necessary to achieve his objectives, even if those means involved violence, oppression. And there's a particularly dark chapter in his story that really illustrates this.
You're talking about the Jaragua massacre of 1503?
Yes. That event, where hundreds of Taíno people, including their leader Ana Corona, were brutally killed, is a stark reminder of the cruelty that often accompanied Spanish colonialism.
It's a stain on Ovando's legacy.
It is. But amidst all of that, it's crucial to remember that the Taíno people resisted.
They didn't just passively accept their fate.
Absolutely not. Their resistance took many forms. Small acts of defiance, organized rebellions. There's one notable example, a cacique, that's a Taíno chief, named Enriquillo.
What made Enriquillo's resistance so significant?
He led a rebellion that lasted for over a decade, using guerrilla tactics, harassing the Spanish, evading capture. He became a symbol.
A symbol of what?
Of Taíno resistance, of that unyielding human spirit. Even in the face of overwhelming force, it's important to highlight these stories.
Right. It's a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of history, there are always stories of hope and resilience.
Absolutely. So Ovando leaves Hispaniola in 1509, but his impact, well, it doesn't end there. What was the state of the island? What about the Taíno people?
It sounds like a complicated legacy.
It is. Hispaniola was a transformed landscape, literally. Santo Domingo was a thriving city, a testament to Ovando's administrative abilities. But the indigenous population had been decimated. Their numbers had dwindled drastically. Disease, forced labor, the violence, their culture had been irrevocably altered.
Progress for some, devastation for others.
It's a pattern we see repeated throughout history. But there's another aspect to Ovando's legacy, something you hinted at earlier.
Oh, right. You mentioned he introduced something new to Hispaniola.
He was a bit of a gardening enthusiast. He's credited with introducing several new crops, including, most notably, sugarcane.
Sugarcane. The guy who's overseeing this brutal colonial regime is also a, what, plant lover.
It highlights that complexity. He was capable of great cruelty, but also had these, what seemed like mundane passions.
But this introduction of sugarcane wasn't just some harmless hobby.
No, it had massive consequences. Sugarcane, unfortunately, became linked to the transatlantic slave trade.
The demand for sugar in Europe was insatiable.
It was, and that demand led to the horrific practice of forcibly transporting millions of Africans to the Americas to work on those plantations.
So this seemingly simple act, this introduction of a new crop, had far-reaching and devastating consequences.
It did. It's a reminder that even seemingly small actions can have these ripple effects that extend far beyond their intended purpose. We've covered a lot of ground here, explored Ovando's actions, his motivations, his impact. But I think it's time to take a step back and think about how all of this continues to shape the Caribbean today. Ovando's story really is a complicated one, a mix of ambition, efficiency, brutality, and those unintended consequences. It makes you think about the realities of colonialism and the impact it had and continues to have on the world.
It does. We've talked about the administration, the economics, the religious conversion efforts. All those things still have echoes in the Caribbean today.
They do, and perhaps the most enduring legacy, and tragically so, is the impact on the indigenous population. Ovando's policies, that encomienda system, it was devastating for the Taíno people.
Their population plummeted.
Disease, forced labor, the violence, all of that took a huge toll. Their culture was dismantled.
It's just heartbreaking to think about. I wonder how much of that trauma, that loss, is still felt today.
That's a question many are grappling with. Scholars, activists, artists, the echoes of colonialism are deeply embedded in the Caribbean, the social structures, the economics, the politics.
Inequality, racial tensions.
All tied to this history. It's not just about remembering the past, it's about understanding how that past continues to shape the present.
And using that understanding to, hopefully, create a more just future.
Exactly. Acknowledging the wrongs, confronting the uncomfortable truths.
So we've covered a lot. Ovando's actions, his motivations, but there's still that question. How should we view this guy? Villain, hero, or, as we asked at the beginning, somewhere in between?
It's a tough one. And there's no easy answer, which I think is what makes studying history so interesting. There are historians who focus on his skills as an administrator, his role in establishing Spanish power, developing the colonial system.
We might say he was a product of his time.
Right, just following the prevailing beliefs and practices. But there are others, and rightfully so, who condemn him.
As a brutal tyrant.
Exactly. They point to the devastating impact of his policies, the violence, the cultural destruction. It's hard to separate the, what some might call, achievements from the atrocities.
It's almost like you have to hold both of those things in mind at the same time.
I think that's key when studying history. We can't simplify it. We can't force these neat categories of good and bad. Ovando's story, it's a reminder that the past is messy, complicated, and often very unsettling.
But we have to learn from it.
We do. We can acknowledge accomplishments without condoning the methods, and hopefully learn from the mistakes so we don't repeat them.
So as we look back on Ovando, on this period, what should we keep in mind?
Approach it with a critical eye, be willing to confront those uncomfortable truths, and have empathy for those who suffered.
That's powerful, and it's a fitting end to our deep dive into Nicolás de Ovando. We've journeyed back in time, explored this pivotal moment in Caribbean history, and grappled with some pretty big questions.
About colonialism, power, legacy.
If our listeners want to learn more, what would you recommend?
There are some excellent books and articles out there. The Dominican Republic, A National History, that's a good one, by Frank Moya Pons, gives a comprehensive overview. And if you want to go deeper into the impact on the indigenous population, the Taínos, Rise and Decline of the People Who Greeted Columbus, by Irving Rouse.
Always good to check out your local library, too.
Absolutely. Primary sources, things like letters, diaries, firsthand accounts from the period, those can offer some really valuable insights.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive, but I hope the conversation doesn't end here.
History is an ongoing dialogue. We're always discovering, reinterpreting, and by engaging with these stories, asking those tough questions, looking for multiple perspectives, we can continue to learn and grow.
So as you go about your day, think about those hidden histories all around you. Every place has a story. Every object has a past. And sometimes, exploring those stories can lead to some pretty surprising, thought-provoking truths about ourselves, about the world. Until next time, keep exploring.